Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the Five Pager My Voice, Your Choice. And in today's edition, I have brought to you a book by Matthew Polly titled Bruce Lee Alive. Chapter 1, Sick Man of Asia. 10-year-old Li Huichuan stood barefoot on the dirt road outside a corrugated tin roof restaurant on the outskirts of Foshan City in southern China. He wore threadbare clothes passed down to him from his three older brothers. As urban pedestrians wandered down the street, Hui Shen sang out in a Cantonese the restaurant specials of the day. Friends, countrymen, come, come, come and try our fresh stewed beef brisket, water spinach with fermented tofu, frog legs on lotus leaf, congee with century egg, and sweet and sour pork. His tender voice rose up and down with each menu item, a dancing falsetto. Among the hundreds of peasant boys employed by restaurants across the city to hawk their menus, there was something special about the way Hui Shen sang, a wry, ironic undercurrent. On this particular day, a famous Cantonese opera singer passed by the restaurant, heard the humor in the young boy's voice, and invited him to become his apprentice. Bruce Lee's father ran all the way back to his small village to tell his parents the good news. The year was 1914. Revolutionary forces had recently overthrown the Qing dynasty and established a constitutional republic, putting an end to 4,000 years of imperial rule. The new government had a weak grip on power. Various factions vied for control. Popular revolts had erupted in major cities. Bandits roamed the land, and the peasantry struggled to survive. The suffering was particularly intense in the Li household. Hui Xuan was the fourth of six siblings. His father, Li Junbiao, suffered so many ill turns of fortune, neighbors believed he was cursed. A severe fever in childhood damaged Junbiao's throat to the point where he could barely speak, causing many to assume he was a deaf mute. He struggled to find enough work to feed his family. Along with a part time job as a security guard, he was also a fisherman. He often took his boys with him to catch supper. Hoishian's parents were overjoyed that their son would be apprenticed to an opera singer. It meant one less mouth to feed and a potential career for one of their children. On the appointed day, Hoishian left his home to begin his training, an incredibly brutal, down to dusk regimen of acting, singing, acrobatics, and kung fu, also spelled gung fu, training. Unlike its more staid European counterpart, Chinese opera featured extravagant costumes, bright full face makeup, falsetto singing, Olympic class gymnastics, and both weapon and empty handed stage combat. After years of schooling, Li Huishan joined the senior actors on the stages of Foshan. His specialty was comedic roles. In 1928, his opera troupe decided to move 60 miles south to Hong Kong in search of larger and wealthier audiences. Ever loyal to his family, Hui Shen invited several of his brothers to join him in the British colony and help them find jobs as waiters and busboys. Hui Shen was still supporting his acting career with part time work in a restaurant. As Hoishan and his opera troupe performed across the colony, their fame grew to the point where they were invited to give a private performance at the palatial home called Idlewild of Sir Robert Houghton Bosman, the richest man in Hong Kong. It was here that Bruce's father and mother, Li Huishan and Grace Ho, first laid eyes on each other from across China's economic, cultural, and racial divide. The maternal side of Bruce's family was as wealthy and influential as his father's was poor and powerless. Grace Ho was a member of the Eurasian Bosman Houghton clan, Hong Kong's equivalent of the Rockefellers or the Kennedys. Her grandfather was Charles Henry Morris Bosman, Although many have thought Bosman was German Catholic, Bruce Lee's great grandfather was actually Dutch Jewish. He was born Moses Hortag Bosman in Rotterdam on August 29, 1839. Moses joined the Dutch East Asia Company as a teenager and arrived in Hong Kong in 1859. His fortune was made in the coolie trade. He shipped Chinese peasant laborers to Dutch Guiana to work the sugar plantations after African slavery was abolished and to California to build the Central Pacific Railroad. His business success led him to be appointed the Dutch consul to Hong Kong in 1866. Given the anti-Semitism of the time, all of his letters to the Netherlands Minister of Foreign Affairs was signed M. Bosman. Soon after his arrival in Hong Kong, Bosman purchased a Chinese concubine named Zi Tai. The teenage girl had grown up on Kongming Island, Shanghai, in a good family, as evidenced by her bound feet. Girls from wealthy families who did not need their feet to work could afford to have them bound. But when her father died, her family fell on hard times, and the girl was literally sold down the river to settle debts. Zeta produced six children. Since the father was from Holland, they were given the Chinese surname Ho. Moses Hartog Bosman fell into serious financial difficulty and went bankrupt in 1869. He abandoned his Chinese family, moved to California, and changed his name to Charles Henry Morris Bosman. To protect her children, Zita became the fourth concubine to a Chinese cattle merchant, Kwok Chung. He had little interest in providing for her Eurasian children and barely gave them enough money to eat. But Zi's Tai convinced him to pay for the children's tuition to the prestigious Central School, now Queen's College, where they learned English. Robert Houghton was the eldest son of Zitai's six children with Bosman. He grew up to become the comprador foreign agent for Jadon Mathewson, the largest trading conglomerate in East Asia. He made his fortune in shipping, insurance, real estate, and opium. By the age of 35, Bruce Lee's great uncle was the wealthiest man in Hong Kong. To help him with his varied business interests, Robert Houghton hired his younger brother, Ho Kom Tong, who quickly became the second richest man in Hong Kong. Bruce Lee's grandfather's two great passions were Cantonese opera acting. He performed on stage in support of fundraising events for charity and women. Ho Kom Tong married at the age of 19 and soon after began taking concubines until he reached 12 in total in Hong Kong. In the household he maintained in Shanghai for business, Ho Kom Tong kept his 13th concubine, a Eurasian lady named Miss Cheong. In Shanghai, he also had a secret British mistress who provided him with another daughter, his 30th child, in 1911. Her name was Grace Ho or Ho Yi in Chinese. Nothing is known about Grace Ho's English mother or why she gave up her little girl, but Grace was raised by Miss Cheung as her daughter. As the one half English, one quarter Dutch Jewish, and one quarter Han Chinese child of an elite Eurasian family in colonial Shanghai, Grace Ho's upbringing was very European. Instead of learning to read Chinese characters, she was taught English and French. As a teenager, she studied Western medicine in hopes of becoming a nurse. She also converted to Catholicism, no doubt attracted to its absolute insistence on monogamy and condemnation of polygamy. Grace saw firsthand how miserable it made her adoptive mother to compete with a dozen other concubines for the attention of one man. Grace was determined to live a very different life. She wasn't happy with her father's traditional sinful ways, says Phoebe Lee, Bruce's older sister. Instead of accepting an arranged marriage, as was common for Chinese and Eurasians of her class, Grace ran off to Hong Kong when she was 18 and moved in with her uncle Robert. Grace became a socialite in Hong Kong, filling her days with fashionable social gatherings. She was wealthy, independent, and single throughout her early 20s, a rarity for a Chinese woman in that era, until the day Li Huishan's opera troupe came to Sir Robert Houghton's Idlewild mansion. Sir Robert intended the event for his friends, but his niece Grace Ho asked her uncle to allow her to attend. She had little experience with traditional Chinese art forms and wanted to see her first Cantonese opera, which was considered a lowbrow vaudevillian entertainment for the Chinese masses. Li Huishan and his troupe rode the Star Ferry from Kowloon to Hong Kong Island and trekked up to Idlewild at 8 Seymour Road mid-levels. The actors painted their faces with thick makeup, donned their ornate costumes, and tested their kung fu weapons before marching into the courtyard to entertain this private audience of Eurasian elites. Grace was intrigued and delighted by the performances, but the longer she watched, the more her attention was drawn to a handsome young actor with excellent comedic timing. Just in those 10 minutes or so when Dad was on stage, says Robert Lee, Bruce's younger brother, Mom was deeply moved by his performance technique and developed feelings for him. She fell in love because he made her laugh. In 1930s China, it was unheard of for a woman to pursue a man, but Grace sought out Li Huishan and charmed him. It was doubly scandalous for the daughter of a wealthy family to become enamored with a struggling actor. Marriage was a financial institution with little room for romance. Grace was supposed to wed a wealthy Eurasian scion, but not the son of illiterate Chinese peasants. Her entire clan was against the relationship. Threats were made, pressure was applied, but Mom was very independent, strong willed, and adaptable, says Robert. And she finally made up her mind she wanted to be with Dad. As the child of two cultures, Grace's choice was a microcosm of the conflict between Western individualism and Chinese tradition, romanticism versus family obligation. In traditional China's patriarchal polygamous culture, Grace Ho wed for love. She wasn't formally disowned, but her decision to elope caused a rupture and she was financially cut off. Grace went from being a wealthy socialite to the wife of a Chinese actor. So, those were the 5 pages from Bruce Lee Alive by Matthew Polly. I hope you enjoyed it. To purchase the book, I have provided a link in the description box below. Thank you. Happy reading.